What does it cost to be wrong about who understands the difference between a clear sky and a death trap? 11 people found out in 1997. These two women were about to find out again. He raises his arm. One clean gesture, palm out, fingers together. Stop. The sky above Antelope Canyon is a perfect, unbothered blue. Not a cloud, not a shadow. The sandstone walls glow amber and copper in the afternoon light, and the air smells like warm dust and nothing dangerous at all. The guide says 4 words: we need to go back. The two women look at each other. One of them smiles, the other lifts her camera. We paid for a babysitter, one of them says, loud enough that it carries in the narrow slot. They've waited months for this trip, saved up, planned it out, talked about it at dinner parties. This canyon, this specific canyon, was the whole point. And now, this man, this licensed, mandatory Navajo guide who knows every curve of this rock, is telling them to leave under a sky that looks like a postcard. He doesn't argue. He repeats himself. They walk past him. Here's the question that will follow you through everything that comes next. In a place where the sky directly above you means absolutely nothing, where the sky 50 miles away, over a watershed you'll never see, is the only sky that matters, what does it cost to be wrong about who understands the difference? The guide knew something they didn't, not because he was smarter, not because he had better equipment or a weather app they lacked. He knew because he had spent years learning to read a landscape that kills people who misread it. And they had spent months looking forward to photographing it. But before we can understand what they walked away from, we need to understand why a licensed guide isn't a luxury in Antelope Canyon. He's the only reason anyone comes out. Antelope Canyon sits on Navajo Nation land outside Page, Arizona, a town of about 7,500 people, perched at the edge of the Colorado Plateau, where the desert stretches so flat and so far that the horizon looks painted on. The canyon itself is a slot, a crack in the earth carved over millennia by water and wind, so narrow in places that you can touch both walls simultaneously, so tall that the sky above you is reduced to a thin ribbon of light. It is, by nearly every measure, one of the most photographed places on Earth. The images are everywhere, that signature beam of light dropping through the red-orange rock, the walls rippling like frozen silk. People plan entire trips around a single hour inside those walls. These two women had done exactly that. They'd spent the better part of a year building a southwest road trip around this one stop. The itinerary was meticulous in the way that social media travel is meticulous, the right angles, the golden hour windows, the specific lens settings other photographers had posted in forums. They weren't casual tourists, they were prepared, just not for the right things. Guided tours at Antelope Canyon are not optional. They are not a suggestion or a theme park courtesy. The Navajo Nation, which manages this land, legally requires every visitor to enter with a licensed Navajo guide. No exceptions. You cannot purchase a ticket and wander in alone. The rule isn't bureaucratic friction. It exists because people died here without it. On August 12, 1997, 11 tourists were killed in Lower Antelope Canyon. The sky above the slot that afternoon was clear. The storm that killed them formed approximately 75 miles away near Bryce Canyon and sent a wall of water funneling through the drainage system with almost no warning. Visitors had no guide, no one reading the upstream conditions, no one who understood what a rising hum in the rock actually meant. 11 people, one afternoon, clear sky. That event is why the mandatory guide rule exists. It is written in those deaths. The women knew about the rule. They'd booked the tour, paid the fee, shown up on time. What they hadn't absorbed was the reason behind it. To them, the guide was a formality, a bureaucratic hoop dressed up as a person. An overpaid babysitter collecting a fee for walking alongside people who clearly didn't need walking alongside. But here's the thing. To feel the full weight of what they were dismissing, you need to understand what a slot canyon flash flood actually is, because it operates by rules that defy every instinct you have about danger. The walls of Antelope Canyon are not rough. That's the first thing that surprises people who touch them. They're smooth, almost polished, curved into sweeping undulations that photographers describe as otherworldly. Visitors assume it's wind that shaped them, wind and time and the slow patience of erosion. It wasn't wind. Those curves were cut by water moving at speed. Centuries of flash floods, each one carving the sandstone a little deeper, a little smoother, until the walls look like something sculpted by hand. The canyon itself is a record of every flood that ever passed through it. You're standing inside the evidence. Antelope Canyon drains a watershed that stretches across the Kaibito Plateau and the Painted Desert, a catchment area of roughly 40 square miles of exposed Navajo sandstone and hardpan desert. When rain falls on that surface, there's almost nowhere for it to go. No soil deep enough to absorb it, no vegetation thick enough to slow it. The water sheets off the rock and immediately begins moving toward the lowest point, which is the canyon system. It doesn't require a catastrophic storm. A localized thunderstorm dropping 2 inches of rain on dry hardpan 50 to 100 miles upstream is enough. The water consolidates as it moves, picking up sediment, debris, logs, anything loose on the canyon floor. It accelerates as the channel narrows. By the time it reaches the slot itself, it isn't water anymore in any familiar sense. It's a pressurized mass moving faster than most people can sprint. And then there's the geometry of the trap. The walls of Antelope Canyon rise 120 feet in many sections. They're sheer. In the lower canyon especially, there are stretches with no ledges, no natural handholds, no cracks wide enough to climb. The floor can go from bone dry to chest deep in under 2 minutes. Survivors of the 1997 flood described hearing a low rumble before the water arrived, a vibration in the rock more than a sound. One guide that day survived by wedging himself into a crack in the wall. Most of the 11 people who died never reached the walls in time. Here's the part that breaks the brain. The sky directly overhead during all of this, still blue, still clear. The storm generating that wall of water is invisible from inside the canyon. You cannot see it. You cannot hear it until it's almost there. You cannot smell it. Every sense you have tells you the day is fine. Every sense except the one that comes from years of reading this specific landscape. Now go back to that moment at the canyon mouth, the guide's raised hand, the blue sky, the laughter, and ask, what exactly was he reading that they couldn't? He'd been doing this for years, not months, years. Navajo guides at Antelope Canyon don't just pass a licensing exam and show up, they apprentice. They learn the canyon in every season, every light condition, every weather pattern. They learn it the way you learn a language you grew up speaking, not from a textbook, but from being inside it so long that the patterns become instinct. What he was reading wasn't mystical, it was pattern recognition built over thousands of hours in a single specific environment. Navajo guides learn to watch cloud formations over distant plateaus, the Kaibito, the Painted Desert, the high ground north of Page, where storms build before anyone in the canyon can see them. They track shifts in air pressure, subtle changes in the quality of light, the way the wind moves through the slot at ground level. Some describe a smell, petrichor, that sharp mineral scent of rain on dry earth, drifting through the canyon from storms still miles away. Others describe a sound, not a roar, not yet. A low, almost subsonic vibration that travels through the sandstone walls before the water does. If you felt it once, you never forget it. This is knowledge that belongs to the land and to the people who have lived alongside it for generations. It isn't superstition, it is empirical. It is the kind of expertise that only accumulates when the consequences of being wrong are severe enough to demand absolute attention. When he raised his hand and said we need to go back, he had almost certainly seen something specific, a cloud formation over the watershed, a shift in the air, something in the quality of the canyon's silence that didn't sit right. He knew the protocol. Navajo guides are trained to call the turn the moment conditions suggest risk, not the moment danger becomes visible, because by the time it's visible, it's too late. He called the turn. One of the women reportedly said he was just stretching the tour, running out the clock, padding the hours to justify the fee. He tried again. They waved him off and walked deeper into the canyon. And now he was standing at a threshold, not just a physical one, but a moral one. Does he follow them into a canyon he knows is dangerous? Does he wait? Does he call for help? What exactly he did in those next minutes is part of what makes the reckoning that follows so painful to sit with. What do you do when someone refuses the only thing that can save them? Drop your thoughts below. Have you ever been in a situation where someone dismissed a clear warning and you had to decide how far to follow them? They went deeper. The canyon narrowed, the walls rose on either side. And somewhere upstream, the sky was doing exactly what the guide said it would. The sound comes first, not a roar, not the dramatic crash of something breaking. It's lower than that, a vibration, more than a noise, moving through the sandstone the way a tuning fork moves through a table. The walls hum before the water arrives. Guides who felt it describe it as the canyon breathing differently, something fundamental shifting in the air pressure inside the slot. Then the smell, wet earth, iron-rich sediment, the sharp, almost metallic scent of desert soil that hasn't seen rain in weeks suddenly saturated all at once, carried ahead of the water like a warning the body registers before the mind does. Then the color changes in the light, and then the water comes. It doesn't arrive as a wave in any cinematic sense, something you might dive beneath or sidestep or outrun with a burst of adrenaline. In a slot canyon, there is no such mercy. The water fills the passage the way water fills a pipe. Wall to wall, floor to ceiling, a pressurized column of red-brown debris-laden force moving faster than a sprint, carrying the weight of 40 square miles of watershed compressed into a channel sometimes no wider than a hallway. There is nowhere to go. That's the geometry of it. The walls of Lower Antelope Canyon are smooth, carved smooth by centuries of exactly this. No ledges, no handholds, no cracks wide enough to matter. The floor is the only surface, and the floor belongs to the water now. The women were deep in the canyon, deep enough that the exit sat behind the flood's origin point. The physics were settled. The canyon did exactly what it always does, exactly what the guide said it would do, under a sky that was, in all likelihood, still perfectly blue. It's a hard thing to sit with, not because it was shocking, but because it wasn't. It was inevitable, predictable, documented. When the water receded, search teams went in, and what they found downstream forced everyone who heard this story to reckon with the same unbearable question. Search and rescue teams in Page, Arizona know Antelope Canyon the way emergency rooms know their worst cases. They know where the water goes. They know what the canyon does with what it carries. They know where to look. The women were found downstream. That's the clinical, factual, respectful way to say it. The canyon delivered them exactly where it always delivers what it takes. The guide was there for the aftermath, not as a hero, not as a man who'd been vindicated. He was there as a witness, the kind of witness who has to sit across from investigators and recount in sequence everything he saw and said and did, what cloud formation he read, what words he used, how many times he tried. Twice. He tried twice. There's a specific kind of grief that belongs to people who were right and couldn't make it matter. It doesn't feel like winning. It doesn't feel like anything that has a clean name. The guide had done everything the training, the protocol, the decades of canyon knowledge required him to do. He called the turn. He repeated himself. He watched them walk past him into a place he knew was about to become a trap. And he has to live inside that knowledge now. This is not karma as a headline. This is not a thumbnail. This is a man who spent years learning to keep people alive in one of the most deceptive landscapes on Earth, who was called a babysitter, who was right, and who carries both of those things simultaneously. The Navajo Nation's mandatory guide requirement, in place since August 1997, written in 11 deaths, was formally reaffirmed after this incident. The canyon is still open, tours still run, guides still read the sky every single day. If this story is sitting with you the way it's sitting with me, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but to be part of the people who take these warnings seriously enough to actually learn from them. Every group that walks into that canyon is, in some way, entirely in the hands of the person they've hired. So what does it actually mean to trust that person? What do we owe the experts we've decided to resent? Think about what the guide actually was in that canyon. Not a formality, not a line item on a booking confirmation, not a man whose value could be weighed against a photography itinerary. He was the bridge. Between what they knew, which was considerable in its way, the forums, the lens settings, the golden hour windows, and what they needed to know, which was the one thing no forum had ever taught them, that the sky above you in a slot canyon is a lie. That the only sky that matters is the one you cannot see, 50 miles upstream, over a plateau you'll never visit, dropping rain onto rock that has nowhere to send it except directly toward you. That knowledge doesn't live in a guidebook. It doesn't live in a weather app. It lives in a person who has spent years inside this specific landscape, learning its specific language, absorbing the patterns that only reveal themselves to someone paying the kind of attention that comes from knowing the stakes. The Navajo people have lived alongside this canyon for generations. The mandatory guide requirement isn't bureaucratic friction, it's the formalization of something that was always true. This place requires a translator, someone fluent in what it's saying. And when it says, leave, you leave. When the women called him a babysitter, they weren't just being rude, they were making a declaration. We don't need you. We've done our research, we know what we're doing. In a slot canyon, under a clear sky with a storm moving toward you from 50 miles away, that declaration is the last mistake you can make. They weren't being independent, they were being alone. Alone in a place that does not negotiate, does not warn twice, does not care about your itinerary or your lens or how long you saved for this trip. The guide raised his arm. One clean gesture, palm out, he said 4 words. There's a word that's been hovering over this entire story. You've probably already thought it. Karen. It's in the title, it's in the thumbnail, and it's worth being honest about what that framing is actually doing, because it isn't there to mock 2 women for being difficult tourists. That would be cheap. That would miss the point entirely. The Karen label, when it's applied with any precision, isn't describing a personality. It's describing a decision. A specific one. The decision to treat expertise as a service you've purchased rather than knowledge you need. To treat a trained professional as a servant whose job is to accommodate you, not protect you. To treat your own confidence, your research, your preparation, your sense of having done the work as a valid substitute for the knowledge you don't actually have. That decision has a pattern, and the pattern has a body count. It showed up here as 2 women walking past a raised hand in a slot canyon. It shows up elsewhere as someone ignoring a surgeon's post-op instructions because they read something different online. It shows up as the tourist who steps off the marked trail at the Grand Canyon's south rim, where on average 12 people die every year because the view is better from the edge. The common thread isn't rudeness, it's a specific substitution. Confidence in place of expertise, entitlement in place of information. In most contexts, that substitution is embarrassing. In Antelope Canyon, under a clear sky with a storm moving toward you from 50 miles away, it's fatal. These women weren't villains. They were people who made a decision that this story's entire architecture has been building toward. The decision to be alone in a place that required a translator. And that decision, that specific substitution, is what the guide was up against when he raised his arm for the second time. The same arm, the same gesture. Palm out, fingers together, the same 4 words spoken to 2 people who had already decided they didn't need to hear them. We started with a question. What does it cost to be wrong about who understands the difference between a clear sky and a death trap? The guide knew the answer before he ever raised his hand. The canyon had been answering that question for centuries, one flood at a time, carving it into the walls in smooth, polished curves that look like art and are actually a record of consequence. The answer was always there, written in the rock, spoken by the guide, ignored under a perfect, unbothered blue sky.